So this is the second installment of the more decorative casket build. The bulk of this video is going to be trimming out the base and the top. There's quite a lot of math, especially with the compound miters on the top, to figure all that out. And I will admit, I've admitted it in all of these videos, that trim work and angle work is not really my forte. I can do it, but it just takes me a little bit more time to get to the finish line with stuff like that. So that's basically going to be this video, and the third video will be the top. I believe the rope, trimming out the rope molding, will be in the third video, as well as the decorative elements on the side. If you're waiting for the plans on both these caskets, this one's coming along better than I thought it would. So that should be up, and hopefully by the time this third video is up. And then for the first casket, I'm actually pretty much done those plans. I just have to finalize the cut list, and then that can go up. Now I know I said that these plans were going to be free, but Etsy charges you 20 cents, a minimum of 20 cents to put anything on their site, and that covers the listing fee for the product. So if you want to get these through Etsy, they are in fact going to be 20 cents. But I'm going to try and figure out how to upload these to my website, and then they'll be free, because obviously I'm not going to charge myself a listing fee. So to start this, I'm going to be gluing this together. Now with all the parts in place, this is actually extremely sturdy. It arguably doesn't need any glue, but with all the moldings I'm going to be putting on this, I don't want it moving at all, because the angles are very tight as it is, and if this moves even incrementally, it'll throw off all the angles. So all I did was put some glue in the corners of those laps, and that's enough to hold the frame in place. And then I could go through and just attach all those side flanges with glue as well. It's just a matter of going around and putting glue in the recess, and then putting all these pieces in place. And then once I get done with the bottom, obviously I could go through and do the top, all the corners as well. Just enough glue to hold everything in place. You don't want to over glue in a circumstance like this, especially since I'm not using clamps. All this stuff fits pretty snugly without using clamps, and I don't have enough to do this whole thing anyway, so just hold it in place. Now on some corners my triangles ended up a little proud, and this is less than a 1/16 of an inch. It won't make a big deal, so all I did was sand it down and test the molding against it, and it was fine. I'm feathering it out a little bit so there's not a hump right towards the end. If you have big pieces sticking out, this method won't work, because you will get lumps, and the molding won't sit flat. So then for the base molding was obviously easier because it wasn't at an angle. All of my corners were actually 45 degrees. So with that 45 degrees, I found that out by using a bevel gauge and transferring it to the top, making a mark. I divided that by 2 to get 22.5. Divide it by 2 because you need 2 angles to make the 45. So each side is going to be 22.5, and that was the basic angle on all of those bottom pieces. So it was pretty easy. I just tilted my blade to 22.5, and I can make those cuts. So you can see half of the cuts I'll be able to make with the tapered side facing forward. The other half I'm going to have to transfer the marks to the back side and do it with the base side facing forward. So all I did was I have a piece at the other end in place, and I can mark where this angle has to start. You can see I have it in place on that edge, and then that's where my mark is at the edge over here. Put a little angled stripe so I know which way the blade goes. I'll make miscuts a lot if I don't do that. So you can see I can't cut it on that side because my blade only tilts one way, and it's not super safe to have it rocking on that long piece. So that's where I transfer that original mark to the bottom side of the piece, and then I could cut it that way. So like I said, half of those cuts you'll have to make with the bottom side, half will be from the top side. And then I could just cut these. I usually sneak up on that cut a little bit. That one it looks like I cut it right off the bat. Sometimes I'll sneak up on them, and then I have the corners. As you can see now, that's a nice fit. And I leave a couple of these loose as I go. I work my way around the piece, and I'm working on one I have loose, a straightaway, and then another corner. And then I'll attach this corner, I'll attach the straightaway, and I'll keep the other edge corner loose. Just makes cutting the angles a little bit more accurate that way, without pre-attaching the pieces. So you can see I did that corner. Now I'm using this loose piece to line up that straightaway, and then I could brad it in place. I use brads because that's usually what you use, but this won't be painted, so the brads are a little bit more visible than I would like on the end piece. If I had more time for this, I probably would have spent some time using some strap clamps to put all this molding in place, so I could avoid using those brads. See, on the left hand side you could cut it forward, but on the right hand side you have to transfer those marks to the back. And then that is what that last little bit looks like. Like I said, I worked my way around the box going this way. Every single piece was cut with the exact same angle. You will not be able to do that if your box isn't square. If these corners aren't square, your angles won't line up, which is why I stress the importance of making sure all this is square as you go. And then the last piece, I always keep a short piece so that if I mess it up, I'm not wasting a ton of material. Now for the top, the lid is detachable, and it also, I'm using a specific size molding in order to cover the plies on the edge. So I have to add a 1/4 inch top onto the top I already have, but I want it to be the exact same dimension as the top that's already on there. So I'm using 1/4 inch plywood. I'm ripping it down into 3-inch sheets because I just need to cover the top with a rough dimension. You can see this is what that looks like. And I'm going to lap joint all the corners just to make it a little sturdier. So you can see this is 3-inch pieces. So I have a stop 3 inches from the edge of the blade, 1/4 inch material. I'm going down 1/8 of an inch, make a bunch of curves. I can remove those curves, and then these corners are lapped together. That's basically what that looks like, and it's covering that entire top edge. So then I could glue this together. This is why this is the molding I'm using, and I wanted the molding to cover that edge plywood. If you want to use thicker molding for this, you can make this removable lid out of thicker material. I couldn't go thicker, otherwise you'd, like I keep saying, you'd see that plywood edge. Then I'm just going to glue this together. Pretty self-explanatory. I weighted this because since this is 1/4 inch ply, as soon as you get that glue on it, which has water in it, it'll want to start lifting on you, so I weighted it to keep it in place. Now for all the edges of the ply, I'm also going to edge band them. Once again, pretty self-explanatory process. I absolutely hate edge banding, but if you use plywood, you're going to be edge banding at some point. So I'm doing the full sides, the 3/4. The top I probably could have gotten away with not doing it because, like I said, there's going to be molding along the top, but I would have had differing depth thickness because of the vertical edge banding, so I edge banded that as well. This is only 1/2 inch, so you'll see I have to trim off quite a bit in order to get that top, but I did all the verticals as well as around the perimeter to hide those plies. And I just trim it with a utility knife. So then this was the next day. I added some corner braces to this so it wouldn't lift up, and then some of those got stuck on there with the glue, so all I did was trim those off. Now I'm using a flush trim bit in order to get this the exact dimension as the top, so you don't want a ton of extra material when using a flush trim bit, which is why I went through and trimmed off these corners before I started, so I wouldn't have to go through them with the router bit. So before using that bit, I do want to attach this to the top. I'm using 5/8 inch brads for that. It will be easy to pull this off once I'm done. I don't want this to move around on me. It's pretty important that this ends up being the exact same, a mirror image of the base that I'm going to be working off of. I'm also going to be trimming the inside edge there. You'll see later while I'm doing that. So with a flush trim bit, that bearing is going to follow the dimension that it's run up against, and it will transfer that dimension to the top. So you can see how this is going to be a perfect replica of the base I'm working off of. Could go around the entire outside, and then I'm doing the inside as well, because remember there's that inner rabbet, which like I said I'll be using later. So then for the material for the top, I'm using the exact same thing, but I want it at an angle, kind of like crown molding. So I bought the exact same molding, and I just put a 45-degree cut on the bottom. Now crown's going to have an angle on the bottom as well as the top, because it meets a wall as well as a ceiling. Since I'm just putting a raised panel on the top, I don't need another angle. So all I'm doing is the bottom. I'm just trimming enough off. I didn't change the length of this. I cut that 45 perfectly enough that it stayed the same length. So the top was the same process. I was just working my way around. These corners were the hardest part to figure out because both angles taper up towards the front. The main difference for this is, besides the 45 cut on the bottom, is the blade's going to be tilted, as well as there's going to be an angle cut into the piece. So that is a compound miter, unlike before where it was just the blade tilted. So this is actually two angles you're needed to get these cuts. So like I said, I'm working my way around the piece, and I did this one is how I figured out these angles. I did a test piece to start, and that one worked on all of my corners, so I went from there. I'm also using those cut off 45s in order to hold everything in place, which worked out nicely. So without boring you with the stack of miscuts, the blade tilt is 15 degrees, and I'm cutting at 74 degrees. So my bevel's cut to 74. I have two adjustable miter cuts essentially for my table saw sled, and I'm just going to use that bevel to set those in place. So unlike before where I used the miter gauge and I could flip it upside down, with this one, because I have the two set, I could cut all those angles. So same process, I'm just going to mark that first cut it on the table saw, come back, and then mark the edge. So like I said, those 45s I'm using were the wrong 45s from the base. They ended up working out quite nice holding all this stuff in place. I can mark the bottom, mark where that angle has to come, and then I can bring it to the table saw and cut it. Once again, I'm sheeting up on these cuts so I don't make any miscuts. You can see the first cut I can make using that bottom gauge, and then the top one I flip it, and I'm using that top one for this cut. Now if you're making these cuts the same way I am, this top cut, you just want to make sure you're really holding this against that fence on the table saw, because the blade will want to naturally push that wood towards you. And then I could just go around like I did before and glue all these into place. Now I'm using the blue tape because this is kind of functioning like crown molding on the top of the box, but crown you usually have two surfaces to hold it against. This one, especially when you put the brads in at the bottom, it kind of what makes the top flange out. So I'm using those 45s to hold it in place, and then I'm just going to put some blue tape on there so that they can't flange out. And there are some little micro hairline gaps in the piece, so I'll fill it with a little bit of glue and sawdust just to fill those little hairline cracks. So like I said, same thing. The hardest part of these angles is figuring out the angle. I have quite a large scrap pile from getting these two angles figured out, but once you get them, you can work your way around the whole piece. Same exact thing, if this top isn't square, your angles won't line up. And then I could cut the last one and then add that corner piece. So you can see before I tape everything in place, it actually looks like this is quite a poorly cut piece of crown, but then that tape just pulls everything together. And that's basically how I worked my way around the top. Then the next I could come in and remove that tape. And you could see I didn't have to put all this sawdust on there, but I did all the corners just so that it filled all those gaps. And then, like I said, next week will be the last installment, and it will be the decorative elements and finishing up the top, as well as a little bit of work on the inside of this as well as this one I did put a finish on versus the last one that I left plain.